The vast communication halls of the Viridian Collective hummed with quiet electronic whispers. Hyun Park sat motionless, his dark eyes scanning multiple holographic screens displaying human transmissions from across the galaxy. Around him, advanced monitoring systems tracked every minute detail of human communication, yet something always felt different about these transmissions. Humans were considered a joke among galactic civilizations. Young, brash, technologically inconsistent, they were the equivalent of a toddler playing with advanced quantum machinery. The Viridian leadership had repeatedly dismissed them as irrelevant, a species too chaotic to ever pose any meaningful contribution to intergalactic dynamics. On this particular day, Hyun was reviewing standard communication logs when an unusual transmission caught his attention. It wasn't the content that surprised him, but the remarkable adaptive communication strategy embedded within the message. A simple diplomatic exchange between human representatives contained layers of nuanced communication that most standard translation algorithms would completely miss. His colleague Ji-hoon leaned over, chuckling. "Another human randomness report?" he asked, expecting the usual dismissive response. But Hyun's fingers were moving quickly, capturing and analyzing the transmission's intricate communication patterns. Something was different. These humans weren't just sending messages. They were constructing complex relational networks through their communication. The transmission originated from a small human outpost near the Orion Arm, a region considered relatively underdeveloped by Viridian standards. It appeared to be a routine diplomatic communication about resource exchange. But Hyun noticed something extraordinary. Embedded within the straightforward text were multiple layers of contextual meaning. Humans, it seemed, didn't just communicate information. They communicated intention, emotion, potential future scenarios, and complex social dynamics, all within a single paragraph. Viridian communication was direct, mathematically precise, and stripped of emotional context. Each transmission followed strict protocols. Humans, by contrast, seemed to treat communication like a living, breathing entity that could shift, adapt, and transform. Hyun began documenting his observations, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Each keystroke recorded a growing suspicion that humans were far more complex than the standard galactic assessment suggested. The communication log he was analyzing showed a negotiation between human representatives and a minor trading species. What appeared to be a simple resource exchange was actually a masterfully constructed social dance. The humans weren't just discussing trade, they were simultaneously building trust, establishing long-term relationships, and creating potential future collaboration pathways. Most fascinating was how they achieved this, not through advanced technological interfaces or complex mathematical communication models, but through something far more nuanced: storytelling, emotional intelligence, and an almost intuitive understanding of social dynamics. Ji-hoon noticed Hyun's intense focus. "Finding something interesting?" he asked, his tone slightly mocking. Hyun didn't immediately respond. His mind was processing the implications of what he was discovering. These humans, often described as primitive and unstructured, were actually developing communication technologies far more advanced than traditional galactic models. Their language wasn't just a tool for information exchange. It was a complex adaptive system that could reshape itself based on context, emotional state, and potential future scenarios. No wonder most advanced civilizations had difficulty understanding them. The transmission continued, revealing layers upon layers of meaning. A discussion about mineral rights contained hidden references to cultural practices, historical relationships, and potential future collaborations. It was like watching a master painter create an intricate artwork while simultaneously solving a complex mathematical equation. Hyun realized he was witnessing something revolutionary. Humans weren't just communicating. They were creating living, breathing communication ecosystems that could adapt, transform, and evolve in real time. As the transmission ended, Hyun sat back, a rare smile crossing his typically stoic face. The Viridian Collective had been wrong about humans. They weren't a species to be dismissed or ignored. They were something else entirely, something potentially extraordinary. The stellar frontier near Andromeda's outer rim crackled with tension. A minor conflict had erupted between three struggling civilizations, each fighting for limited resource territories. Standard galactic protocol suggested a diplomatic resolution or a carefully measured military response. But humans introduced something entirely unexpected. Commander David Rodriguez sat in the compact communication center, his fingers moving across holographic interfaces with surprising grace. Unlike traditional military strategists who followed rigid combat protocols, Rodriguez saw the conflict as a complex puzzle waiting to be solved. The opposing force, a technologically advanced species called the Meridian Cluster, expected a conventional confrontation. Their massive warships lined up, weapons charged, waiting for the standard exchange of firepower. What they received instead was total confusion. Rodriguez didn't attack. Instead, he began broadcasting unusual communication frequencies, mathematical patterns, cultural music snippets, and seemingly random data streams flooded their communication networks. The Meridian commanders watched in bewilderment as their sophisticated defense systems became increasingly disoriented. Hyun Park, observing from the Viridian monitoring station, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The human strategy defied every known military engagement protocol. They weren't fighting. They were communicating in a way that disrupted the entire conflict's fundamental structure. Within minutes, the Meridian's complex defense networks began experiencing systematic failures, not through direct technological attacks but through an ingenious strategy of information overload and psychological disruption. Rodriguez was essentially talking the enemy into surrendering without firing a single weapon. The human team used something the Viridian Collective had never considered: emotional intelligence as a weapon. They understood that conflict wasn't just about physical confrontation, but about perception, psychological state, and adaptive thinking. Recordings showed Rodriguez alternating between intense strategic communication and moments of unexpected humor. He would discuss complex negotiation terms and then suddenly introduce a cultural joke that would momentarily confuse the enemy's communication protocols. Hyun watched, fascinated. The human wasn't just a commander. He was a communication artist, using language and psychological understanding as his primary tools. Traditional military strategists would have considered such an approach ridiculous. Yet here it was, working with remarkable efficiency. The Meridian Cluster's leadership found themselves increasingly uncertain. Their rigid communication structures couldn't process the dynamic, fluid approach humans were employing. What seemed like chaos was actually a highly sophisticated communication strategy. Within 2 standard galactic hours, the entire conflict dissolved. No massive casualties, no prolonged military engagement. Just a series of communication exchanges that completely transformed the conflict's fundamental dynamics. Hyun began documenting everything. Each transmission, each strategic communication shift, represented something revolutionary. Humans weren't just another species. They were potentially the most adaptable communicators in known galactic history. Rodriguez's team celebrated quietly, understanding they had just demonstrated something profound. They hadn't won through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had won through understanding, a resource far more valuable than any weapon. The Viridian monitoring systems struggled to categorize what had just happened. Traditional analysis algorithms failed to capture the nuanced, multi-layered strategy employed by the humans. It was like trying to describe a complex musical composition using mathematical notation, impossible to fully represent. Hyun realized he was witnessing a fundamental shift in understanding interstellar conflict resolution. Humans didn't see challenges as problems to be eliminated, but as complex systems to be understood and transformed. As data streams continued processing, one thing became clear. Humans represented something entirely new in galactic dynamics. They weren't just another species to be categorized and dismissed. They were a revolutionary force, capable of solving problems in ways no one had previously imagined. The universe trembled when the Quantum Void Collective emerged from dark space. Massive ship formations larger than entire planetary systems approached, systematically destroying advanced civilizations with terrifying precision. Millions of worlds vanished within standard galactic weeks. Viridian defensive protocols collapsed, like paper structures against a hurricane. Their most advanced technological systems became useless against the methodical destruction of the invading force. Entire research teams watched in horror as centuries of technological development disintegrated in moments. Elena Kim, a human diplomatic strategist, stood in the central command chamber. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the panic surrounding her. While Viridian commanders argued about traditional defensive strategies, she was already constructing a radical collaborative approach. "We need to think differently," Elena said, pointing at the holographic invasion maps. Her finger traced unexpected connection points between human adaptive strategies and Viridian technological infrastructure. Hyun Park, now a senior research coordinator, listened intently. The humans were proposing something unprecedented, a complete integration of human intuitive thinking with Viridian technological precision. The Quantum Void Collective represented mathematical perfection in warfare. They analyzed, predicted, and destroyed with machine-like efficiency. No civilization had ever successfully challenged their invasion strategies. Their computational abilities allowed them to predict and counter every known defensive technique within milliseconds. But humans introduced an element the collective couldn't calculate: unpredictability. Elena's plan involved creating dynamic communication networks that could change faster than the enemy could analyze them. Instead of fixed defense structures, they would develop living, breathing tactical systems that could adapt in real time. Viridian scientists initially rejected the proposal. Their entire military doctrine was built on predictable, measurable strategies. Humans were suggesting something that seemed like controlled chaos. Commander Rodriguez joined the discussion, bringing visual representations of previous successful human interventions. Each case study showed how seemingly illogical approaches had solved complex problems throughout human history. The collaborative strategy involved three key components: human psychological adaptability, Viridian technological infrastructure, and a completely new communication protocol that could change faster than the enemy's computational abilities. "We're not just defending," Elena explained. "We're creating a living defense system that thinks, learns, and transforms continuously." Hyun recognized the revolutionary potential. Traditional galactic civilizations saw defense as a static concept. Humans were proposing defense as a dynamic, evolving organism. Initial simulations showed promising results. The integrated human Viridian systems could potentially create tactical responses faster than the Quantum Void Collective could analyze them. It wasn't about overpowering the enemy, but continuously changing the fundamental rules of engagement. The first test came unexpectedly. A small quantum void scout group approached a collaborative human Viridian research station. Instead of traditional defensive preparations, the station began broadcasting complex, continuously changing communication patterns. The scout group's computational systems became increasingly confused. Unable to predict or categorize the station's responses, they retreated. The first time in recorded galactic history that the Quantum Void Collective had withdrawn from an engagement. Elena and Hyun exchanged a knowing look. They had just demonstrated something profound. Collaboration wasn't just about combining technologies, but about fundamentally reimagining how intelligent systems could interact and respond. The universe watched, holding its collective breath. Humanity and the Viridian Collective had just introduced a new approach to survival. Not through superior firepower, but through adaptive, collaborative intelligence. The battle space erupted in a symphony of controlled chaos. Human and Viridian, ships moved like a living organism, their formations defying every known tactical manual in galactic history. The Quantum Void Collective's massive war machines suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that refused to follow expected patterns. Commander Rodriguez piloted the lead collaborative vessel, his hands dancing across interfaces that merged human intuition with Viridian computational precision. Each movement was a calculated risk, each decision a complex mathematical equation wrapped in human unpredictability. Hyun Park monitored the battle from the central command station, watching in awe as human pilots introduced strategies that seemed impossible. They didn't just fly ships. They treated them like extensions of living, thinking organisms. A massive quantum void battleship approached, its computational systems preparing to analyze and destroy. What it encountered instead was a fluid, constantly changing defensive network. Human pilots moved with an almost musical rhythm, creating patterns that defied mathematical prediction. One Viridian pilot would have followed a straight defensive line. A human pilot would suddenly spiral, loop, and transform the entire battle's dynamics in a split second. It wasn't just flying. It was a form of spatial poetry that completely overwhelmed the enemy's computational abilities. Rodriguez communicated through a series of complex, rapidly changing communication protocols. Each transmission was a puzzle, each movement a question that the Quantum Void Collective couldn't answer. Traditional warfare had become obsolete. The collaborative teams had developed something revolutionary, a living, breathing tactical system that could think, adapt, and transform faster than any known computational method. Human creativity merged with Viridian technological precision created an unstoppable force. Most fascinating was how they achieved this. Not through massive firepower or advanced weaponry, but through a deep understanding of adaptability. Each ship became a node in a massive thinking network. When one experienced a challenge, the entire system would instantly recalibrate. Quantum Void commanders watched in increasing frustration. Their massive computational systems, designed to predict and counter every possible scenario, began to fail. The human Viridian collaborative force wasn't just fighting. They were constantly rewriting the rules of engagement. A critical moment came when a massive quantum void dreadnought attempted to isolate and destroy a group of collaborative ships. Instead of a traditional defensive formation, the ships began moving in what appeared to be a completely random pattern. But there was nothing random about it. Each movement was a carefully calculated response, designed to confuse, disorient, and ultimately defeat the enemy's computational systems. Human pilots introduced emotional intelligence into space warfare, something no computational system could fully understand. The battle lasted what seemed like moments, but transformed galactic understanding forever. The Quantum Void Collective experienced something unprecedented, defeat through adaptability rather than direct confrontation. Elena Kim, watching from the communication center, recognized the profound implications. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a demonstration of a completely new approach to problem-solving, conflict resolution, and collective intelligence. As the final quantum void ships retreated, something remarkable happened. The collaborative human Viridian fleet didn't celebrate with traditional military displays. They began sharing information, analyzing their performance, learning from each moment of the conflict. Hyun realized they had done more than win a battle. They had introduced a new paradigm of collective intelligence to the universe. Warfare was no longer about destruction but about understanding, adapting, and transforming. The universe watched, understanding that everything had changed. Humanity and the Viridian Collective had just rewritten the fundamental rules of galactic engagement. The Viridian High Council chamber fell silent. Holographic displays showed the complete transformation of their civilization in the wake of the collaborative victory against the Quantum Void Collective. Where rigid protocols once dominated, a new understanding now emerged. Hyun Park stood at the center, no longer just a researcher, but a symbol of the fundamental shift in galactic perspective. Behind him, human representatives from Earth waited. Their presence no longer met with dismissive glances but with genuine respect. Elena Kim watched carefully. The journey from mockery to mutual understanding had been long and complicated. Humans were no longer the primitive species everyone had once believed them to be. They were architects of a new type of intelligence. The eldest Viridian Council member, typically stoic and unchanging, spoke with unexpected emotion. "We were wrong," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of misunderstanding. "Humanity represents something we could never have imagined. Decades of scientific research now proved what seemed impossible before. Human adaptability wasn't a weakness. It was the most sophisticated survival mechanism in the known universe. Their ability to think beyond computational limitations had saved not just one civilization, but potentially countless others. Collaborative research centers began springing up across multiple star systems. Where once there were barriers, now there were bridges. Human creativity merged with Viridian technological precision, created solutions to problems that had seemed impossible just years before. Commander Rodriguez, sitting quietly in the council chamber, represented more than just a military leader. He was a living example of how different thought processes could transform entire civilizational approaches to problem solving. The Quantum Void Collective's defeat had done more than protect existing civilizations. It had proven that diversity of thought was the most powerful weapon in the universe. No single computational system could match the adaptive potential of collaborative intelligence. Hyun reflected on their journey. From those early days of dismissing human transmissions to now standing as equal partners, the transformation was complete. The Viridian Collective had learned something profound. Intelligence wasn't about perfection, but about adaptability. Young. Viridian researchers now studied human communication techniques. Cultural exchange programs became the most sought-after diplomatic positions. Where once there was separation, now there was genuine curiosity and respect. The universe had changed. Not through massive technological breakthroughs, but through understanding. Humans had shown that emotional intelligence, creativity, and adaptability were far more powerful than any advanced weapon system. Elena approached Hyun, a subtle smile crossing her face. "We did something remarkable," she said quietly. The we was significant, no longer separate species but a collaborative force. Diplomatic records would show this moment as a turning point, the day when two completely different civilizations discovered that their differences were actually their greatest strength. The day when humanity proved that being unpredictable wasn't a weakness, but the most sophisticated form of intelligence. The Viridian High Council's final declaration became a historic moment. They formally recognized humans not as a developing species, but as equal partners in galactic exploration and problem-solving. Every previous assessment was officially invalidated. Hyun looked at the holographic displays showing collaborative research centers, joint exploration missions, and integrated communication networks. What had seemed like chaos was actually the most advanced form of organizational structure the universe had ever witnessed. As the council meeting concluded, something fundamental had changed. The universe would never be the same again. Humanity had transformed from a species considered insignificant to the architects of a new type of collective intelligence. The stars themselves seemed to celebrate this new understanding. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to see beyond what was and imagine what could be.